without further ado, I am happy to welcome you all to Impactful Research is a Team Sport, presented by Peter Roessler.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I'm humbled and I appreciate your time for your attention and your time today. As Teresa said, my name is Peter Roessler. I'm currently Director of Research at an early stage startup called OpenPhone. Today, I'd like to present to you a perspective on interpersonal relationships that I feel, based on my past experiences in my career, are as critical to the quality of the work that we deliver, and also just helping to more clearly define our role in what we're calling a team sport in this presentation. So I want to start things off with a definition. Stakeholder is a contentious word and one perhaps working its way out of widespread usage, but I did want to use it to reference people we work with in the industry for the sake of the talk. So I found an early definition of the word published 40 years ago. You can see I'm referencing Edward Freeman here. So he says that stakeholders are members of groups without whose support the organization would cease to exist. The examples that they included were employees and managers who are, in the trenches with you to build products and services, as well as board members helping to guide the company's strategy, and shareholders that have a vested financial interest in the company's success. So for the purposes of my content, a stakeholder is just simply a member of a team that's helping to deliver the company's products and services, and with whom you're working directly or indirectly in that process. So examples, therefore, being fellow employees and team or department managers. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, I'm going to start us off with a story. So I worked for a large enterprise software company early in my career, and we were exploring needs with customers for both administering the software and customizing it for the specific needs of these complex businesses, our customers. There were lots and lots of complexity to uncover, as you can imagine. And then based on this whiteboard session I have on the slide with one of their leaders, you can see sort of different combinations of roles and responsibilities for both administration and customization. This varied with the size of different customer participants in the research. And of course, as the researchers in the room would be familiar, patterns naturally emerged from my data set. So the data told us that we had a matrix of profiles in the customer population that fell along two axes, from full focus on core administration to full focus on customization, and also from low to high coding experience. So, there were interesting tensions and needs and stories illustrating not just the edge cases in this graph, but a large gray area that fell in between as well. So, in fact, a majority of the customers that had employees who were a mixture of these two roles in one combination or another, so both administration and customization in different mixtures. I also thought to myself at this point, hooray, I have insights, everyone's going to love these findings. But when I went back into the organization to dig up some quantitative data to support my qualitative insights, this is what I found. Now, this was a question in a survey customers were asked to answer when they were signing up for access to my company's customization tools. Does anyone see the issue here? You can go ahead and emoji in Hopin to respond. For me, I certainly saw a problem with this. I knew that the story wasn't this straightforward. So now this was a survey question that had existed for years before my research was conducted, authored by the developer marketing team. And the product managers had been supplied with statistics from this survey data and specifically from this question on a monthly basis for quite a long time. So imagine the friends I made pointing this out publicly to the developer marketing team, to the product management team, to the user experience team, to some of the company's leadership, that the data that they'd been generating wasn't only inaccurate without the ability to multi-select, but it may actually be misleading. So raise your hand or give me emojis if you think I got tons of cross-functional support pointing this out the way that I did. And now raise your hand if you think this didn't go very well for me. So those that responded to not going very well, yes, you're right. This was basically reputational suicide. You'd think, wow, this is obvious. Everyone should be happy that I found this mistake. But people are involved. People's egos are involved. The reputations of others are involved. Self-worth is involved. And pushing hard on this basically broke down many of the channels of communication I'd established. I didn't really give developer marketing a chance to share their perspectives. I didn't create space to understand any of the history or the background that may have existed in order to see any of it from the developer marketing team's point of view. I also didn't take the time to share my concerns respectfully and non-judgmentally. So in our daily work as researchers, we're experts on a wide diversity of data collection methods. And we place an emphasis on the mechanics of our work, on the processes, on the methods, on the moving parts of collecting great data, analyzing great data, getting the right data, and getting all of this into the product and design decision-making process. Great data that's critical to driving influence and impact on the products we're hired to deliver. Part of the problem here, though, is that research impact is fraught with challenges, grounded in our ways of working, grounded in our organization's dynamics. And it seems like every single part of the product development process where we try to participate has issues that seem to work against our ability to do our jobs well. But maybe there's a different angle that we can take to re-examine this, sort of a reframing, if you will. So I want to propose here a correlation between the principles of strong, trusted relationships and the impact of research contributions. That showing up in our relationships and building trust is the most effective way to maximize stakeholder engagement in research and the impact of hard-earned research insights. And in doing so, building credibility with your stakeholders. That it's not just about the mastery of the methods or the artifacts or the insights. Yes, obviously they're really important as well, but they fall flat when we neglect the relationships that allow us to not just deliver our best work, but have an enthusiastic audience for it. So I propose that high performance and technical competence alone just doesn't get us there. Now, this idea isn't a new concept in the industry or anything. Like, thought leaders talk about this all the time, albeit not specific to research. And this is one of many posts of this nature that you can find cruising through social media. Here, this person, Simon Sinek, which many of you may have heard of already. He's a world-renowned leadership coach, consultant, and speaker. And he says strong relationships, whether at home or at work, are based on trust and communication. And if there's no communication, there's no trust. Here, Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist and a podcaster, and he posted saying, excuse me, the ultimate test of success is not whether you're proud of what you've achieved, it's whether you're proud of who you've become. Accomplishments may highlight your skills, but relationships reveal your values. And if excellence is what we do, character is what you do for others. And finally, Tim Ferriss, he's an author of The 4-Hour Workweek. He's also a podcaster and investor in early stage startups. And I really like this quote. He says, a person's success in life can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations he or she is willing to have. So the example I want to share here to further highlight my point comes from Simon Sinek again. And he talks about building human skills like listening, empathy, and patience to unlock trust. So this QR code here will take you to the 5 or so minute YouTube video, but I'll summarize in the next slide. So you'll hear in the podcast that he talks about research that shows professional colleagues actually vastly prefer to work with people they trust who maybe aren't the highest performers on the job, than to work with those that have really strong job performance that they actually don't trust. So therefore, the big question here is just like, how do we gain the trust that we're after? Like, what are the communication principles we can keep in mind to build trust in order for this team sport of doing research to work? So I'm proposing listening, empathy, and vulnerability. Now, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to define these principles for you, and then we're going to walk through some examples of situations I've been in personally and how these principles could have helped me in each situation. So first, listening. So Jack Zenger, he's another world-renowned expert in leadership development. He wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review that listening actively isn't just about absorbing everything that's being said from someone, but about building upon what is said to you as a demonstration of having processed and interpreted the information they shared, while also being supportive and cooperative to continue the conversation going. So here you're sort of taking out the time to explore the perspectives of who you're working with in a constructive dialogue where you're also contributing, which is actually a little bit different from what we're used to doing when we're conducting unbiased user interviews. The next principle is empathy. So Brené Brown, she's an American research professor, lecturer, author, and podcast host. She does many, many things. She's known for her research on shame, vulnerability, and leadership. And so she defines empathy as feeling with people. So this is connecting with something in yourself that knows the feeling that the other person has. Oftentimes we use the anecdote, walking a mile in their shoes in American English. And so to get there, you have to do four things. You have to take the other person's perspective. You have to stay out of judgment of that perspective. You have to recognize the emotions that come along with the communication of that perspective. And then you need to communicate back the recognition in what you share back to them. And the third one is vulnerability. So Brené's research also gives us a great perspective on vulnerability that we can draw from. And this appears throughout her lectures and books, but specifically, she talks a lot about it in her book, Daring Greatly. And here she describes vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So in other words, you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, let go of perfection, and be willing to test the waters with your honest ideas and perspectives. And this is not unlike what I'm doing right now on this stage. So demonstrating this strength and this courage in your interactions, that you're sort of stable in your sense of self and you're willing to share your perspectives, that act establishes deeper relationships with our colleagues. Okay, so now you can respond and hop in here. A show of hands of who in the audience is skeptical of these three principles. And it's fine if you are. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that you're skeptical. I want to now take the three principles of good communication into scenarios that I've experienced. And you guys may have experienced yourselves. So we can learn from what I didn't do to be a true team player and how these principles could have helped me. Okay, so let's first go back to the scenario I covered in the beginning. I like to call this, I'm the expert and you don't know what you're doing. Okay. So this issue with the survey question, this potential oversight, this really wasn't the moment for me to point out publicly how severe I thought this mistake was. So first of all, as I said, I have no background information. I didn't spend the time to talk candidly with my product marketing team. I didn't carve out space to walk in their shoes. I didn't give them a chance to respond to my concerns or even ask me for help in a less embarrassing way. And I think if I had taken out the time to share my concerns respectfully and listen to what they may have had to say about the circumstances, like maybe tried to understand a little bit more about the situation from their perspective, I could have had the opposite effect on all of my stakeholders, and the impact and the influence that I was seeking would have still been there. But again, the focus was on the survey critique. And it's unfortunate, but the political dynamics I created had a direct negative effect on the attitudes of my peers, and therefore the impact of my research. So even though the research was good, the insights that I uncovered weren't paid attention to. So for this example, my overarching lesson is just the importance of treating research as a team sport. Like we're all trying in different roles. We have our own reasons and our own ways to try to move forward our shared goal of delivering great products. And sometimes trained researchers, we find ways that things can be improved. But it's not really about telling colleagues they did something wrong. It's about teaching them respectfully how to do it correctly without introducing shame. I also think it's important to ask ourselves how we can add the most value in situations like these, intentionally setting the tone for the relationships. Beyond our core project work, what are our opportunities to frame our expertise? How do we teach or demonstrate versus shame about research methods to build trust? So a couple of things that you could consider, this could look like a democratization program. Like this means just enabling your colleagues in their capacity to learn. So that, for instance, designers can more directly participate in evaluative testing on their prototypes. It could also just look like training. So holding informal meetings where you cover research topics like writing surveys or writing discussion guides or analyzing qualitative data. We should be asking ourselves, like, how much about what we do our stakeholders even understand, and how can we meet them where they are? Okay, so my second scenario, I'm calling, do you ever say no? And so in this example, I'm going to briefly describe circumstances I found myself in at an organization that wanted to streamline the intake of research study requests with a research intake form. So this isn't my intake form. I just grabbed this off the internet, but the stress that a similar solution we implemented caused a small, lean, somewhat unseasoned research team was pretty large. So again, raise of hands. Any researchers who've had issues with a large volume of requests that they couldn't handle? Yeah, so needless to say, this process broke down for my team pretty quickly. It became clear that there was just misalignment between the needs that the product managers had and the types of research that they were requesting in the form. It also wasn't clear to product managers how impossible it was going to be for researchers to field such a large volume of requests that the form generated. In fact, most of them were unaware that the volume of requests and how overwhelmed the team became in the first place. We were stuck. We were frozen like a deer in headlights. So getting back to the principles, we didn't have the vulnerability in this situation to initiate the conversations we needed to be having with product leadership to suggest new ways of working together to problem solve the situation proactively. We weren't taking out the time to listen to their needs, and our work quality suffered as a result. The form, I would say, in this circumstance wasn't empathetic towards the product managers, because all they knew is they got some basic instructions from us and were asked to submit these forms for research needs. They were basically following our guidance and thought that they were doing the right thing. And also, you could turn this around and say it's also not empathetic to the research team, because we basically set ourselves up for failure. So at the end of the day, what we thought was sorely missing here were thoughtful and collaborative communication mechanisms versus a form on Airtable as a mediator. The form basically stood in the way of these much needed face-to-face conversations to decide on strategy and prioritization. So I'm not saying anybody on the team would have had time to sort of rifle through all of the individual requests and have conversations around each one of them. In fact, this was sort of the reason the idea for the forum came up in the first place. But it did suggest broader, more strategic conversations were missing and needed to be had to get the most impact out of the research team. So then we asked ourselves, like, how might we be spending our time working on what matters versus feeling overwhelmed with a high volume of like potentially less important requests. And then second question we asked ourselves, how might we align research needs to the product strategy or the company's goals first, and then start generating requests from there? So, we moved into deeper participation in agile planning sessions with different product areas. The benefit of agile Scrum-based processes is that it sort of balances everyone's inputs and drives consensus. It's essentially designed to encourage good communication. And then finally, we engaged more deeply with product management leadership versus product managers, where we were able to directly address the bandwidth issue, throw out the intake form, and then really get the top-down support to partner strategically with product management. And my third scenario I'm calling, is the user really always king? Okay, so in this final example, I'm going to briefly talk about a product manager relationship that was sabotaged by my lack of understanding of all the moving parts and factors contributing to a product release. And this is a photo of a product manager who I built a solid relationship with. He's obviously very supportive of research. He's even here out in the field with us, visiting a customer, interviewing someone and taking notes. And the product goal that we had was to revamp a console interface for one of our company's products. So this research project and field research went really well. We learned a ton. We built user profiles from the data along with the PM, and we used those profiles heavily in design sprints, made a ton of progress on a new version of the product, and really improved these designs. So very effective research. Unfortunately, the user interface to set this console up for the administrators of the product, it's just very poor. It was very poorly designed. We sort of neglected the user experience there, and customers found it unusable in the lab and usability testings. We needed to give them tons of prompts, tons of instructions to get through the tasks. So in this case, I felt I needed to throw up a strong warning sign. So sort of a red traffic light, if you will, to not release this new console design until the admin UI could be fixed. And this, unfortunately, just permanently destroyed my relationship with this product manager. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Wasn't I doing the right thing by stopping a bad design from being released? Well, I wasn't taking into consideration all of the other drivers a product manager needs to consider, mainly business drivers and technical constraints. And sometimes there are strong business reasons, frankly, for getting functionality out the door, even if you know it's going to cause some pain for a certain user. And in this case, frankly, there were other examples of bad administrator experiences in the overall product our company provides. That administrators took pride in figuring out. The difficulty was like a code of honor. So the negative impact of this particular release and this additional poorly designed administrator UI was pretty small, weighed against the benefits of the new console design for the end users and what that effect that would have on customers. So, this could have been talked through with the PM. I had worked so hard to influence. It's very painful to lose a highly supportive product manager for the research team. And I had to ask myself, what were the competing forces and what was going to have the strongest impact on the business? That was something I didn't ask myself in the situation. I could have spent time understanding the circumstances from the product management perspective. So did we just not have enough resources to focus on admin UI? What were the business and technical constraints that this product manager was contending with? I also could have actually been brave enough to voice my concerns, perhaps garnered the cross-functional support that was necessary in the next release cycle, and partnered more closely with product management and design to prioritize the administrator experience moving forward. So ultimately, our businesses are very complex, and I think we need to have empathy for all of the contributions that go into product decision-making. I've listed some of them here on this slide, and these certainly vary in different organizations, but this gives us a sense of the inherent complexity in the decisions product managers need to make. Our job as researchers, we're still there to represent the needs of users, but also to acknowledge the balance of other inputs that determine experiences that our companies build. And so asking ourselves, what opportunities might we as researchers create for ourselves to better understand the bigger picture? Impact here might look like being a thought partner to your product manager and helping them to make sense of all the inputs that they need to pay attention to, including yours. Okay, so now one final emoji show of hands. Who in the audience is now less skeptical of these principles? So it's fine if you still are, but hopefully these real world examples from my past work experience, you can take some of these ideas into your daily work and in your work relationships, and hopefully that benefits yourself and your company. I would just advise that we should all be coming up for air from our projects and exploring new ways to apply these three principles in order to build better trust and up-leveling what we mean when we say research is a team sport. And with that, I thank everyone for their attention.